Right, Tara, we're live.
Is the video done?
Yes.
Okay. Bonjour everyone. Jabawekwe Indigenous Makwan Coaching and Dunchaba. My name is Tara Houska. I'm Bear Clan from Coaching First Nation, calling in from right on the border actually of Coaching First Nation. Really glad to be here with some awesome people who are going to talk about mascots, kind of responding to the port-neches Indianet debacle at Disney World and how that looked and how that actually plays out in our communities, what that means, what those kids are learning, all the things. So I wanted to open up by just like saying a little bit about each of us will say a little bit about ourselves, our names, where we're calling in from, and why this issue. Since we don't have an enormous amount of time, if people could keep it to, at least a reasonable minimum, that would be good. I'll start with just saying that my own relationship with Native mascots is tied to me working out in Washington, D.C. as a lawyer for tribal nations and dealing with the Washington football team firsthand, and just being so shocked at what was happening and the use of our imagery and how ignorant people were on Capitol Hill about our issues, and seeing Native people hurt again and again by the federal government, and then watching this ignorance play out. So I started Not Your Mascots with Johnnie Jae and a couple other folks. Been targeting these really racist leftovers for a long time. And I'll pass it to Lumumba, if you want to go first.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, my name is Heritier Lumumba. I am Mura by way of the Amazon in Brazil, and Congo by way of West Central Africa. I was actually born on Guarani land in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, but I spent the majority of my life in a place called so-called Australia, a continent that's made up of over 300 different nations with their own unique and amazing cultures. And on that land, I became a professional football player, playing Australia's Indigenous game, its national sport, which was based on a First Nations game that was played for thousands of years. So I played within the sports entertainment complex and understand mascots because I've seen firsthand the inner workings of a corporatized sport. I'm a coalition member for the Indigenous Peoples Movement and have been since 2019. And I played a role to date as being someone that connects people across borders, across boundaries. Like I said, I'm tied to Brazil, the Congo, Australia, but right now I'm broadcasting live from Turtle Island on Tongva and Chumash land here in so-called Southern California. So thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to this discussion.
Johnnie, if you want to go next.
Sure. My name is Johnnie Jae, and I'm from the Otoe, Missouri, and Choctaw tribes in Oklahoma. I'm currently living in Tongaland, which is here in Los Angeles, and I am the founder of a tribe called Geek and also a co-founder of Not Your Mascots and Live Indigenous OK. And I've been tackling the mascot issue for probably as long as I can remember. It's, growing up in Oklahoma, it's been something that has always been discussed in our Native communities. And just as you get older, you find new ways to start tackling the issue. And that's a little about me.
And Michael, if you want to go next.
Yeah, I'm also in Tombaland here in Los Angeles. I'm born and raised in Southeast Texas. I've been working against this particular school for a couple of years now with other people in the area. done a lot of work over the last couple of years, and I guess I just want to say thanks to everybody that's here that's talking about it, and all the organizations that are involved that have provided so much information for educating the students that are confused about these issues, and myself, a white guy married to a woman who's Mandan Hidatsa, enrolled member of the 3 affiliated tribes in North Dakota, and I have a little boy. To me, this mascot issue in Southeast Texas is a big problem, and it overflows into other areas. I think education and allowing students and young people to be miseducated in this way falls into other places, like land situation. These kids graduate and start voting on legislation that's affecting Native communities and all sorts of stuff. So I feel like mascots can be kind of a root issue in a way. And thanks for letting me be here. I'll try not to talk too much.
Oh, looks like, did Votan join us too? I've seen him in the chat. Okay, well, in the interim of getting Votan from Insurgents up as well, on that tip of like the root pieces, something that I think, if you're a Native person and you're advocating for your community in any way, which is, any kind of work that you're doing for your people, I think one of the things that we run into really often when we talk about this issue is we got more important things to worry about. Why focus on this? Like, who cares? We've got an MMIW issue. We've got, extraction that's happening on our lands. We've got extreme poverty, homelessness, houselessness, all these different issues, healthcare. I mean, you name it, and it's happening to Native peoples. So what would be, when you hear these things, I'm going to go to you, Johnnie, first. Where does this lie in that spectrum, and why does this matter?
Well, I think it matters because it intersects with all these other issues, and it ties back to the deeply ingrained racism and anti-indigeneity that is basically the foundation of the United States of America. You can't separate one from the other. And when we're talking mascots, we're often told we got bigger issues, and we're often told, by people who are in support of mascots, that it's just a cartoon, that it's just a caricature, that it's just a mascot, and we should worry about these other issues. But the problem is because all of these issues intersect, they all impact one another. And when we're talking about mascots, and when we're talking about Native people in America, our history has been so whitewashed that the mascot is the only point of reference that a lot of people have to who Native people are. And of course, as Native people, we know it is not a reflection of who we are as actual living, breathing human beings. But for a lot of non-Natives, that is the only reference that they have for Native people in our contemporary times. I mean, the hypervisibility of mascots in general have just really contributed to the hyper invisibility that we face on our own lands. It's the reason why we have been so erased, and why people see the mascot and they see it as a point of pride instead of seeing us as the actual living human beings. And so, we can say that, yes, we do have these bigger issues, but we can't tackle those bigger issues without first addressing the root, which is anti-indigeneity in America. And it's all tied together. And yes, mascots is just one symptom of that anti-indigeneity, but it's happening in our schools, and it's happening in colleges. It's happening in places that are raising up the people who are dealing with policy. And regardless of whether or not we see it right away or not, these mascots have an impact on the way that non-Natives view Indigenous people. It has an impact on the way that, our educational realities, our political realities, our even professional realities are impacted. We have to contend with these mascots in every little thing that we do. And it's not just the mascots, it's the stereotypes that people have of Native people being alcoholics, of drug addicts, of being uneducated, of backward. in everything that we do as Indigenous people, we have to contend with that. And it impacts, the reality that we see around us. It contributes to that. So, we do have to tackle every single one of these issues. And as Indigenous people, we know that we are capable of multitasking. We don't have to just take one issue one at a time. We have to attack all of these issues at different fronts, which is the most wonderful thing about Indian country, right? Is that every single community has so many people working on every single issue in different ways. And yes, we all come together and we discuss certain issues like the mascot issue. But when you look at community levels, the work that is being done to address alcoholism, to address suicide prevention, it is mind blowing and it is such a beautiful thing. And I don't think that work should be erased by people who say that we have bigger issues, because we are working on all of these issues 24/7. We really just don't get a break from having to address these issues.
For sure. I mean, the whole like you can't walk and chew gum at the same time is always like, you really think that we can't oppose racism at the same time as we're doing all this other work for our communities? I mean, I know that you for sure and many other folks are out there doing all manner of things for our people, and it's not just one issue, it's all the issues. There's one piece of that always actually kind of strikes me also on this like whole like the root kind of issue, which is with Native mascots in particular, more than any other mascot I've ever seen, more than any other issue I've ever encountered, the vitriol and attachment and absolute like death grip, like refusal to give up, Native mascots in particular is really, really, really strong. I mean, I personally think it has a lot to do with colonialism and the fact that people don't want to reconcile with that they're being confronted pretty directly by the fact that we are still here, by the fact that Native people didn't just die out and that we live on in this caricature form that they get to have fun with, but that there are real Native people that are like, no, like you're not doing that to us. But I'm curious to hear from you, Lumumba, about, in particular, like sports pride, but especially around Native mascots, because there's been other mascots that have changed. But, this specific genre is like, people just will not let it go. Do you have any thoughts on why that is?
Absolutely. I mean, there's many layers to this, and I really appreciate Johnny for your outlook on this, because you made some amazing points. The first thing that comes to mind for me as someone who was a former professional football player in Australia, for example, we would play in front of. I was fortunate enough to play in front of 100,000 people, on several occasions, and I really understand the primal nature that sport activates. For example, in what other place in society can you go into a stadium and yell abuse at someone? You know what I mean? So what that does to people and what it does, to the average person is it seems to activate, I guess, the primal aspects of being a human. And when I think you combine those primal aspects of being human with colonialism, as you mentioned, Tara, it really does make for a recipe for disaster. And we see it time and time again. In Australia, for example, the team that I played for, and I only found this out recently, there's a theme song that's played before and after every game if you have a win. And the players would sing it. I sung it. There's a line in there that refers directly to the enslavement of Africans, a cakewalk, and people unconsciously do this. But and I have to say that I had no idea of that until later, until I got the information and I was able to sit with it and understand, wow, how really messed up it was. So what I want to say to that is that these things have the ability to activate trauma. And when you think of people who have survived colonialism, regardless of where you are in the world, we are still early in our healing journey. For centuries, this culture of domination has impeded on our way of life. And it has only been recent that we have really been able to address it in ways that we weren't able to previously, when there were more severe forms of violence that were being waged upon us. And what I think is that in our healing journey, what this does is it has the ability to obviously reactivate that trauma. And for some reason, I don't know what, I'd like to throw it over to you, but I feel like people actually get a rise out of that. You know, I feel like the dominant culture gets energized by it. You know, when you think about people, you know, I'm sure you've all heard the saying, you know, picture tells 1,000 words. Well, a mascot is a symbol, and a symbol tells 1,000 pictures. And what that does is, what is that picture that evokes? Well, that picture is, you know, we were the ones that were dominant. We were the ones that we have full reign over you. We dominate your culture. This is your land that we stand on, and we can do whatever we want. And they do that almost subconsciously. And then you have children, and this is the sad thing about it, you have children that are being already programmed into that program. So when people say, oh, you shouldn't worry about this, it's just a mascot, what I would say is go and study Nazi Germany and the way they use symbology to control the minds of people. This is symbology at its greatest. That's what a mascot is. And when a mascot celebrates, basically celebrates colonialism, celebrates genocide, then we have a really big problem, and we really have to you know, do something about it. So that's what I'll share. That they're the things that come up for me when I see it. It goes back to sport being something that brings the prime nature of humans to the forefront, and then when you combine that with colonialism, which it supercharges everything, and you see a manifestation like someone celebrating a symbol of genocide. It's horrendous.
Thank you for that. You know, one of the things that I've personally witnessed when I'm at like these various demonstrations or whatever is you see a lot of fans that don't really think about these things, right? Like they are genuinely pretty much just ignorant about it. And then they see like these Native people there and they're like, oh God. And like, it's actually like embarrassing for them, right? Like heads down, walking past, like, oh no. But then you see other people, and other people are openly, you know, screaming at you, swearing at you, telling you to like go back to the reservation, you know, flicking you off. I mean, doing the war whoop right in your face. I mean, it really does get at the heart of, I think, a lot of dominance issues and rejection of the fact that Native people still exist. And it's just it is just a mascot, but it's a lot more than that, right? Like I think that's part of that attachment. So my next question is about children in particular, you know, and the harms that it brings upon innocent minds who, you know, I mean, nobody starts out life racist. Nobody starts out life as like I'm in dominance of everyone else, right? I mean, those are learned behaviors. So, Michael, you actually are from the area that we're talking about. You know, what's been your experience with this, and what in particular, you know, do you see as harms to children that are learning and adopting these behaviors? You have to unmute yourself.
Thanks. Amateur over here. Thank you for the question. I kind of wanted to also respond to Lumumba about what he was saying about that cakewalk idea, this sort of like thing that he almost didn't even realize. The song or the chant or something, he didn't realize that it had these sort of like racial implications, or maybe had some allusions to slavery. And I think that that's what's happening in these school systems. Like, so you've got big sports teams with terrible names, but you could turn off the TV or you can leave the stadium. With some of these schools, sort of speaking to what you were saying, Tara, is that like when a student's at a school and has these things happening around them, they can't turn it off. They can't leave the school. Kids don't get to pick where they go to school. Kids don't pick where they're born. They don't get to, you know, you just can't. Some have the ability to leave, or you just try to tune it out. But I totally agree with you. I think that like kids are not born racist. I don't think people are born racist, but what's happening at Port-Neches-Groves and then at the other 52 schools in the state, and then in every state in the country, I mean, with mascots like this, you're spreading misinformation at best, and you're propagating a culture of racism and violence to Indigenous people at worst. I mean, students are, you have impressionable youth, and they're possibly the leaders of tomorrow. And I feel like, it's detrimental. It's deeply detrimental. And it's making accidental racists. It's making accidental, like people that are going to go out into the world and engage in a negative way. If that makes sense. That's kind of all I have to say.
I appreciate that. Votan, can you hear us now?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Kinda. There's a lot of feedback. I can hear myself.
Can you hear me?
I'm gonna go back to Johnnie. One of the things that you guys were discussing right before we started this conversation was, there's a lot of documented studies on the harms of Native mascots to Native children. It harms self-esteem. It has very, very clearly, this is years and years worth of this is harmful to Native children, like point blank. And for me, that's actually where the mascot issue should end, right? It's like, it's about our kids, dude. Like that should be more than enough. Then you're like clinging to this thing, like you're a grown ass adult. Why hang on to this so tightly when it hurts kids? You know what I mean? If you're a Native student and you're in port-neches, like, how does that feel? You know what I mean? Like you're sitting there watching your classmates and your teachers dressing up as your people. Of course that hurts, of course it hurts to see like a mockery and a caricature of things we hold sacred and dear. That is obvious. But one of the pieces you were talking about was like, what about the harms to like other kids, right? Mm-hmm. And I know that we've discussed that, like, I think it was out of New York, that study where like it said like, if you are around a Native mascot, you're actually more likely to adopt stereotypes about other races of people as well.
Yes, and also that you have a negative view of actual Indigenous people. Like the only positive association that you'll have is actually with the mascot. But when it comes to the actual Indigenous people, Indigenous history, that it's not taken as seriously, and it's seen as something that is very negative. And, there's studies that show the harms that are done to Native children, but also to non-Native children. And I think what needs to be done at this point is a study that kind of goes after the harm that happens on an entire community. Because, I mean, we all go through high school, right? And we kind of look at these times, like we're told these are the best days of our lives. And, we kind of make fun of some of those people who, are in their 40s, 50s, still wearing their Letterman jacket and trying to show up to like high school parties. Like we see that trope, right? And we see it played in movies and we all laugh, we all joke around. But when we're talking about Native mascots, there is something that goes very wrong in terms of how the community starts viewing their identity and their culture, not only as individuals, but as a community. Because there's something very unsettling when, we're fighting Native mascots, and it is a mascot. We're talking about stereotypes. These things aren't really real. They're not real. They're not tangible, and they're not a culture. They have no really reflection of anything real, right? But I'm going back to 2019 here because this is where it got me started in thinking about this. Was up in Killingsley when they were talking about retiring the Redmond mascot. And I believe this is up near Connecticut somewhere. But in 2019, when this issue came up, like they had already voted to retire the mascot, but then the elections happened and a whole new school board came in and they decided to revisit this issue and to try and get the Redmond back in the school. And it was such a bizarre discussion, like we're used to talking about Native mascots. We're used to the pushback. But what made this situation very unique was that in the days leading up to the vote on this Native mascot, one of the pastors at the church opened up the church and he was offering milk and cookies and offering prayer and emotional support to people in the community who were so upset about the possibility that the mascot would be retired. And they interviewed an 80-year-old man who talked about how this mascot and voting to get rid of this native mascot was taking away a part of his identity and his culture. And it kind of blew my mind that at 80 years old, there was a human being out there who didn't have a culture, who didn't have a community, who didn't have, who even, like with all these things that we become as people, whether we're mothers, fathers, daughters, or, we become lawyers or teachers, all of these things that make us who we are, that at 80 years old, there was one man whose main tie to an identity and to a culture was a high school mascot. And there was something very unsettling about that. And I see this in PNG, the way that the community talks about the mascot, it's the same thing. They talk about it as being part of their culture and their identity. And we talk about cultural appropriation in this, right? Because they're using our imagery. And the level of cultural appropriation in this community and how ingrained it is, and how it's evolved over time is mind-blowing, because we talk as Native people, we talk about the issues that we face. We talk about, like why it's not okay to wear a war bonnet, that every feather is earned. Well, because we started having these discussions, well, the culture in PNG has also changed to reflect that as well, because now they're players and, they're cheerleaders, to wear their war bonnets is now an honor, and that they have to earn every single feather in order to have a war bonnet. So they're adopting from what we are doing as actual Indigenous people. Like they're taking that and they're ingraining it, and they're trying to say that this is how they're honoring Indigenous people. They say that the Cherokee people have blessed them, but the culture, the Native culture that they are reflecting in their community is not the Cherokee culture. The Cherokee didn't wear war bonnets. And, truth be told, when the Cherokee issued this statement, they were speaking on behalf of all Indigenous people, which is not right, because no tribe and no individual as a Native has the ability to speak for all of Indian country and or give them permission to use a culture or a heritage that isn't theirs, an identity. Like you can't do that. And so, the Cherokee Nation asked, that they revoke that proclamation that made it okay. They revoked that blessing and asked them to reconsider using this Native mascot. And that's absolutely what they should have done to correct the wrong that, they, I guess, helped contribute to in the first place by giving this school permission or making it seem like they gave them permission and that it was okay. So there's a lot of layers that go into this, but it's just perplexing to me just, that these schools, that they have no identity, like they have no community culture, and that it's all ingrained into a high school mascot. High school is 4 years. School altogether is what, 12 years? 12 years of your life. And your entire identity for not only your students, but your community hinges on a high school mascot. There is something so unsettling about that to me, when it's just not reflective of anything real. And it's not reflective of Indigenous people. It's not reflective of any of our tribes or any of, who we are. It's not reflective of our values. And so for this community to kind of take that on as an identity, and then to tell Indigenous people that we're dishonor, and that we don't understand culture, that we don't understand community, is just the most mind-blowing thing in the entire world to me, especially in this moment where this high school went to Disney World and put this on display without a single thought that other people were going to see this and see the same racism that Indigenous people have been talking about and have been raising awareness about. And it's just a mind-blowing thing to me, just how ingrained this sense of entitlement to Indigenous identity and to our culture is, especially in these towns where they use Native high school mascots.
Yeah, and the pushback is always, well, we're honoring you, right? And I think what was interesting with this high school in particular, I mean, we've worked on many, many, many different high schools, right? And colleges, well, college kind of like NCAA at least like did a little bit better, but like professional teams or whatever, What was unique with these guys is that they actually sent like their kids after Native people on the internet, which like was really, I mean, I haven't experienced that before. I've never like had a bunch of high school students commenting and telling me that like I was being honored and I'm just like too stupid to understand. You know, I was particularly like, wow, you guys have a whole other level going on down in Texas. Been doing this for a lot of years, never encountered that. Lumumba, I'm wondering, like, you know, in that always automatic pushback of, hey, we're honoring you, you know, and mascots are about honor. We wouldn't pick something that's not strong and powerful. You know, why do you think that we would pick your people? Like, you just don't understand. You know what I mean? Like that. What would be your response to that one?
Yeah, look, my response to that is, once again, you're determining what it means to us to be honored. And that's really the heart of it, of this dynamic of colonizer and colonized, is we'll tell you all about what your values are and your morals are. We'll give these to you and you'll have to adopt these. We will take away your spiritual beliefs and your traditions, or we'll make them illegal. You know, we'll strip you of your names, we'll take away your land. And then what we'll do over time is we'll take what we want from it as symbols of our dominance, and we'll activate them to inspire our people to continue the cycle. This is, you see, this is where it's at. Yes, you have people, or you have children in particular, that are ignorant to the specific histories at play here. And I understand that, you know, when someone doesn't fully have an appreciation or have the ability to contextualize, you know, a particular situation, then, you know, they're ignorant and they, you know, they need to do better, obviously, but they may not have had a chance to do better. But we're not even really talking about those people in particular. What we're talking about are the decision makers. We're talking about the people who are in the positions of power that do know and already understand and have an awareness of what many people have been telling them, and they choose to ignore, and they use the same playbook by saying, you know, you're the ones with the problem. You know, we're trying to honor you and you should be gracious, basically, you know, that we've even spared you. We won this war, basically, and, you know, you should be grateful that we've even allowed you to be alive. You know, you should just only do things that are, you know, that we can tolerate, that is palatable to us. And so that's really the attitude here that's at play, that words can, there's so many things that can be understood beyond the words, and it's really about power dynamics. And what it comes back to is a point that I made last time, but if I'll elaborate a bit more on it, which is, for us, for people, for survivors of colonialism, symbolism has the ability to activate our trauma and reinforce the power dynamic. You know, for example, I take out my wallet. If I have a dollar bill, I've got a symbol of colonial dominance in my hands. I drive down the street. I'm here in Los Angeles. I drove down the street on Christopher Columbus Highway. Again, I'm reminded once again of what's happening. I drive and I see a statue of whoever it is, some old white man who probably raped, you know, violently raped tens of you know, women, hundreds of women, even, whatever it is. That we've seen it all. We've seen this narrative that's played out. But what I want us to kind of consider is on the spiritual level. You know, when we think about the spiritual aspect of this, what does it actually do to their spirit? Why do they cling on to this for so much? Why do they cling on to this so much? Because I think at the core of it is what you said, Johnny, is really, for them, that's their power. That's how they derive their power, the power to be able to do whatever the hell they like and celebrate these symbols, because it makes them, it reinforces that power dynamic. To them, they won the war. But I think for us, you know, we really need to remember the fact that it is still war, and there's so many ways that this warfare is taking place. So when it comes to how to make a change, then we have to confront this head on. And that's why it's so important. Even the symbols are just as important as, you know, other aspects that you know, a lot of people think that take precedence over something like a mascot, but it's really in the symbolism that controls the subconscious mind. And you know, we have to, I believe, continue to confront it.
For sure. And I mean, when you're talking to people who are like literally in your face telling you I'm honoring you, and you're like, okay, but you're arguing with an actual living Native person that's standing in front of you. Do you really feel like you're honoring me at this point? And now you're screaming in my face, right? And you're telling me I'm stupid and I'm ignorant and I just don't understand. Or I'm trying to take your culture away from you. That piece that you're talking about, Johnny, is always really fascinating to me. It's like, and I think so much of the foundations of this, beyond, you know, the obvious like genocide and slavery, like the theft of land, theft of labor, which is at the heart of the United States and of a lot of colonized places. There's also this piece of like, you know, we are going to take what we want. We're going to do what we want. But then we're also going to all try to be exactly the same and erase any form of culture, right? Like, we're not going to be German anymore. We're not going to be French anymore. We're not going to be Dutch anymore. We're not going to be any of these things. And then now it's like, oh, but we don't have any culture. So let's take the pieces that we really liked of the people that we like supposedly quote unquote dominated, even though we're still here, and have fun with it. You know, like let's continue on with this really violent assault on these people, you know, to the extent that we can actually just own their image against their will. Or we
And
can
you're right, because I mean, when you think about where mascots came from, you know, when we started to see a rise of mascots and people using Native symbology was at a time when there were around 250,000 natives left in the US. Like at that point, they already thought they won. They thought we were extinct and no longer here. So these mascots were a way to memorialize us, which, you know, for me, it's no mistake that, like with other mascots, it's just the head, it's just a trophy, the way that they put up deer heads or any other, you know, game that they kill to celebrate that kill. You know, Native mascots were no different, which is why when you're looking at Native mascots, it's always just the head, it's always just the silhouette of the head. It goes hand in hand, and you know, that's not a mistake. You know, that's not just a coincidence.
No, or we're like, well, come on now. I mean, you guys are being compared to, you know, like bears are awesome, lions are awesome. Why wouldn't you want to be awesome like that? And I'm like, you are comparing us to like an entire culture of people, multiple cultures actually, because there's hundreds and hundreds of nations, to animals. You understand that, right? Like that's like your premise of like your basis for this. I wanted to hear more from your perspective on, you know, some of the pushback is also around like kind of like this, oh, you guys are just being sensitive. This is about PC culture. It's like liberalism. Like you guys are just being overly woke, like cultural appropriation. It's really not that harmful. We're a mixing pot, blah, 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 blah. Michael, living in LA, it sounds like the rest of you. I'm sure that's pretty common and something you run into a lot. I know there's a lot of cultural appropriation that exists in a lot of places. So what's your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I will say that, like, as far as pushback, first of all, like, I've actually, one of the people that I work with in Southeast Texas told me some of the stuff that people were saying to you, Tara, and I'm really sorry about that. Like, there was some like terrible things online, like, and I see like children from this community and adults from this community attacking Native people online, like you know, just like you were saying, like real live Native person. Like, how can you say this to me if you're honoring what you're doing is honoring, and it's really shocking. And Lumumba, what you were saying about like we won, we're gonna take what we want. Like one of the things, like I saw a post recently, and I don't want to trigger anybody or anything, but like it was like we won the war, Indians are dead, we take what we want, we blah 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 blah. And I guess that's just common, but it's also like shocking. And I feel like speaks to like the education level that's happening in the area and across maybe the world, and also to, you know, again, this idea of manifest destiny and people wanting to hold on to that sort of magical American tradition and not think about any of the you know, real genocide that happened all across this country, and just sort of again shooing it away. I think that, like, you know, history books need to be rewritten, obviously to some degree, and it does speak to like how these children are being educated, at least in port-neches-groves. I just kind of went off and you asked me an actual question. Wokeness. So this is something that like people in that area really like to say a lot of, especially because I'm currently in Los Angeles. I've been fighting against this school for, almost 10 years, and working with other people in the community that have been Native individuals, regular white folks, like, all sorts of colors, wide range of people. But recently, obviously, it's sort of like become like more part of the zeitgeist of what's happening down there. And people have, it becomes about politics. It becomes about like liberal wokeism or whatever that is. And I feel like it's really hard to, it's difficult. Sorry. It's just not about politics. It's about right and wrong. It's about listening to Native people talk about Native issues. It's about, and I feel like what happens is this sort of, it just becomes about politics. That's one of the reasons I said that I had reached out to the Republican Party of Jefferson County. I was trying to get some bipartisan support on this. I reached out to the Democratic Party in Jefferson County, and they were very supportive, sharing information that I provided them about the protests that are happening this coming Monday. And of course, the Republican Party, the outgoing chair, Julie Nichols, called me a communist and hung up on me when I just wanted to have a conversation about education and what's happening in the area. Because I do feel like this is not about politics. This is about right and wrong. This is about like educating a community and all the communities. It's not just port-neches-groves, obviously. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, that certainly helps. I mean, I think, one of the fastest ways to get a Native person characterized as a left-wing liberal is by us saying something that they don't like. You know what I mean? If you're a Native, like the first time I ever got called a Native activist actually was by the Washington Post, who was reaching out to Native people that lived in DC asking if we found the mascot offensive. And at this point, I hadn't even been to a protest, like ever, And they asked me if I thought it was offensive, and I was like, yeah. And then they were like, Native American activist Tara Houska found this mascot offensive. And I was like, are you serious? Like, at that point, I definitely was not an activist in any way, shape, or form. What do you make of it, Johnnie? I mean, like, that's pretty common, right? Like, we're just really Native people are really sensitive, even though we've survived like everything imaginable.
Yeah. And here's what I find funny, right? Like Native people, we're constantly having to combat the erasure of our indigeneity. And it's no different when we're discussing these issues, because how often times when it's Native people who are on the forefront of these and being loud and, showing up, organizing these protests, and yet every single time we get reduced to liberals, we get reduced to left, or we get reduced to Democrats. And it's a very unique position for us as Indigenous people, especially, for someone like me, who is in the mindset that both the Democratic and Republican parties need to be abolished because they no longer serve any purpose aside from, creating their own profits. Like for me, the way that I see it is, Republicans are the worst kind of bullies, but I also think Democrats are the worst kind of cowards, because when they have the opportunity to stand up and do the right thing and to stand beside Indigenous people, they tiptoe towards it, and they'll try to be polite. They'll try to tiptoe around the issue. They don't want to get their hands dirty because they want to seem likable. They want to seem polite. They want to seem like the good guys. And we're in a bad place. How many times when over the last I'd say 8 years, with the Trump administration and of course with the Biden elections, how many times have Indigenous people spoke out about the issues that are important to us, and we face racism and we face these stereotypes from both the left and the right. When it comes to, Trump, when he was calling Elizabeth Warren Pocahontas, well, all of a sudden you have people who are Democrat, who are supposed to be liberal and progressive, throwing those same slurs at other Indigenous people. And, when confronted by Native people, they were like, well, they did it first. And so, for us as Indigenous people, we're in a very awkward situation when it comes to how everything is politicized. Because, I think that's part of the problem that we have in America is just that everything has become politicized. And just like these mascots have become an identity for these communities, a problematic identity, so has politics, because so many people only identify themselves as Democrat or Republican. And they don't realize that they have been so disconnected from their humanity that they can't see other people's humanities outside of those labels and outside of those mascots. And that's part of the problem that we're having to contend with. And it makes this all the more difficult because, this is also contributes to why we have racism without racist,
Not to
and why.
mention the fact that, like, I mean, when it comes to Native folks, are we really like out there like, yeah, Democrats, yeah, Republicans, yeah, U.S. government? That's not usually the case, right?
Exactly.
I'm not saying there aren't Native politicians. I know, Lumumba, you have to go. So if you have final thoughts, would love to hear your really powerful voice.
Yeah, well, firstly, it's been an honor to share this space. I've learned so much. Thank you, Johnny, Michael, Tara. Yeah, you guys are all inspiring. I just had some final thoughts to share before I leave. And it was based off of what you were saying, Tara, about how do you reason with someone like that? And I feel like I just want to share a place that I'm at the moment, and the way that I see it. And I don't have the ultimate truth. I don't pretend to have the ultimate truth or the monopoly on the truth. But through my journey, I feel like I'm at a point now where I've tried reasoning, and I'm at a point where I realize how profound the level of psychosis is that colonialism has created within our society. When I think of the mental health disorders that people encounter because of colonialism, as people who were colonized, we know the impact of it. But quite often we don't look at the mental sicknesses that are inflicted on the people that perpetuate it, the people that benefit the most from the colonialism. And so when I think about it, it really is a psychosis. It's a psychotic way of thinking. And I don't think that we can even reason with people that are within this deep level of psychosis. They haven't even begun their healing journey to get back to their humanity, what you were touching on, Johnny. What I think about is when you think about psychosis or what's the definition of that? The definition of a psychosis is being disconnected from reality. You're talking about a culture that's disconnected from the earth without not even understanding that they are part of this living organism, which is this planet that we have. They're disconnected from their own history, of understanding their even recent history and the way that their culture has worked to basically have waged genocide amongst cultures that have existed for thousands upon thousands of years. So we're dealing with a psychotic culture and a psychotic way of thinking, and we can't reason with that. We're not at a point where we can reason, in my opinion. We have to, and this is, again, I don't have the monopoly on the truth, but I feel like we need to understand the depths of the warfare, and we have to be in this war. And I think the most effective way that we can deal with this is, yes, you can reason with some people to a point, but when you reach a certain wall, rather than wasting your energy on that, we have to work out some kind of way that we can bring a level of consequence to the actions. And I think the most effective way that that can be done is through evoking shame and embarrassment for the actions. I'm not saying that that's what we want to bring shame and embarrassment to children, but when you think about the people who are in positions of leadership within these institutions, they need to be exposed. They need to be put under the microscope, and the pressure needs to go on them, because there are enough people out there that understand the severe harms of this violence that's being inflicted, even through symbology, even through mascots. And so that's what I think is it's beyond reason. It's really warfare, and how can we be more effective in this war?
Miigwech for those powerful words. I mean, corporations have faces, administrations have faces. These are people that are engaging in these decisions, right? And holding them accountable is real. Like it's a very real way of engaging someone. Like they crawled underneath a rock, right? Like they shut down their social media accounts. They're waiting for this to blow over because it's happened before, and then they're going to go right back to it. That's their plan, right? And so I think, seeing panels like this, but also like showing up, actually showing up is important, and keeping the attention on these people. I mean, they did get embarrassed really publicly. Walt Disney actually, the Disney World said something. I mean, that's huge. That's a huge institution for them to actually have to say something. Those are powerful methods of engagement. I'm also a big fan of going after their money. That's always a way to, like, I think, just hit people right in the wallet, because they do care a lot about that, right? Like that's what their entire culture is based around. So like you start going after anything involving like access to Walt Disney spots, right? Like that's a big deal for their kids. Like, of course their kids want to be part of that. They can't do that. They're going to get shut out of that. They're going to lose sponsorships. They're going to lose what? Like, they've got all this public dollars. Like, people are actually asking questions, like, as taxpayers, what am I paying for? I'm paying for you call yourselves what? The reservation? Like, that's real. Those are real tangible things, right? Johnny, do you have any other like tactics that you would suggest for people, or
Maybe.
final thoughts? I mean, because we're getting pretty close to the hour too.
Yeah, I would absolutely think that the most important thing that we could do is making sure that Native people in these communities know the resources that are available to them in terms of what their rights are and the discrimination that they face, because there's a lot of policy already in place, and a lot of these schools violate that policy. And so, we need our families to know that, there are means that they could go through in challenging, going to the ACLU, challenging through Title V, because, we're not supposed to discriminate against anybody, regardless of race, gender. These things exist. And this is absolutely what is happening in these schools when our children have to go to school and see their culture and their identity being mocked, when they are being told that, this is who they are. This is a violation of their basic human rights, and they need to know the resources that are available to them, but also to know that they are supported, that they don't have to, be quiet just to keep all eyes off of them, because that's one of the things I worry about in a lot of these Native communities, where they have to go to school with a Native mascot. Because a lot of times they're very rural community, and they are the minority in that community. You're looking at PNG, and there's probably maybe what was it you said, Michael, like 0.00001, Native population. And, we got to be mindful of those people too, because, they have to live with the fallback. They're going to take on the backlash. They're going to be held responsible for everything that we as Native people do, regardless of whether or not they support that mascot. And it's just because their proximity, they're the Native, and they're going to kind of become the token, right? And they're going to become the enemy. Like, we already see this community telling Native people that we're dishonorable, that we're disruptors, that we're violent. And, I worry about the Native families that are in that community, whether or not they are protected and supported. And, I want them to know what resources are available, and that there are organizations that will have their back and support them as they fight these mascots, that they don't have to remain silent, that they don't have to be afraid, that, Indian country has their back, and not just us, but there are a wealth of allies who, will be there to support them just as well. And I think that's one of the most important things that we can do for Native people in these communities, is just to make sure that they know, without a doubt, that there are resources and that they are supported 100%. Because I think feeling unsupported is one of the main reasons why so many people remain silent.
Absolutely. Michael, final thoughts?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I talked to a father there in the community, and I don't want to say too much about it, because they're trying to keep their head down, and he's got some kids in the school, and he's not really sure, he's not sure what to do, and he's from another community. A lot of people move into that community because I will say this about Port-Neches-Groves, they do have a good school and good sports teams, I guess. But people move there, and then just like you were saying, Johnny, I feel trapped, and I think being able to let people know that there are avenues and resources for them, and that they're not alone, because the community is a bully, and that anybody that speaks out gets bullied. They come down pretty hard on people. People are worried about losing their jobs, losing money, all that stuff. But I hear what y'all are saying about, go after, there are other actions. And that's some of the stuff that we're trying to do, keep the heat on them with our small collective in Southeast Texas. For me, I had a Zoom with last week, the National Congress of American Indians, some folks there. And we talked about reaching out to the tribal nations in Texas and looking at possibly seeing if there's any possibility of getting tribal resolutions through tribal councils to get some solidarity with a ban on mascots in the state. That's kind of my next step. I know protesting, all of this stuff is a paper trail also for me, in the sense of how do we get to the Capitol with this? So if I can get, hopefully we'll see some resolutions, some solidarity with the natives in the state, the sovereign native nations of Texas, and go to the Capitol and find somebody or multiple somebodies that want to champion this issue and, get this thing banned. Because people are making comments in the comments here. There's 52 schools in this state. That's let's say each one of those schools, if they graduate 500 students a year, that's 26,000 students every year. That's 100-something thousand students every 4 years. And they're just going out there with these really negative educations. And again, they're voting on things that are affecting people in Indian country and all over the country. And I just feel like this shouldn't be happening. The native families there, any family that feels unsafe, education system should be safe. It should be a safe learning environment. It should never feel hostile. People shouldn't feel like they can't be themselves and feel good about how they're being taught things. So I hope as we, at least in our little small group in Southeast Texas, continue to move forward, maybe I can be in touch with y'all, because I know that we're going to need some letters for some legislators. The legislative season starts in Texas in 2023, January 10th, 2023. And I'm kind of hoping to pull together some momentum, or at least get some, take this paper trail that we've already made by making public grievances with the school. We've filed public grievances. We've talked to the school board. We've gone all the way to the Education Commissioner of Texas, that kind of stuff. I know we're running out of time, but we've got sort of a big stack of things that we have done, and there's a big stack of things that we have to do. And having people, being able to talk with people like you and sharing your thoughts and views and education, honestly, is such a big help. And I just can't thank you both enough. And also Lumumba, thank you. And everybody again behind the scenes, man, thank you so much.
Yeah, I really appreciate the time and the space. I would add to I think in terms of the pressure and how these folks take it and how they deal with it, the reason that I hadn't really encountered Native mascots when I moved out to DC was because I'm from Minnesota and we banned Native mascots back in 1992. So it's not something that I'd ever really encountered. I knew about North Dakota and the Fighting Sioux, but I hadn't really seen it. I hadn't experienced that or gone to, I think I went to one game maybe, and I was like, what the hell is going on, But even then it was there were people that were working on that issue. But I think it's, to not feel like, yes, it can be very hard when you're one in just a few, right? And that's the experience of every Native person for the most part. We're not walking around in urban centers feeling like, yeah, we've got tons of representation here. Or walking around in mainstream circles being like, oh yeah, saw that awesome Native commentary on the news the other night. That was amazing. No, it doesn't happen, right? There's not any Native reporters that we see. There's no Native talking heads that we see. We have our own little publications and we talk to each other. And it can feel really isolating, and you can feel like, yeah, you guys can support me, but I'm still the one that has to live here. And if I speak out, my kids are going to experience this, and we might experience something I know for sure. And I can bet money I can bet that Johnny's also experienced like death threats and all kinds of horrible acts of violence for speaking out against mascots. It is a very, very, very divisive issue. And so if you're that person in that town, it's a scary thing. And if you're going to a legislature that's like in Texas or Mississippi or even in California, you know what I mean? You'd be surprised at just how many people really do hold on so tightly to these things. And so, maybe your bill doesn't pass. Maybe it's not, it doesn't mean it's not worth the effort. Of course, you're going to garner a lot of eyes on it, and you're going to get a lot of attention, and you're going to get a lot of media, hopefully, around that, if you organize well. But I think in the long run, like one of the pieces that was mentioned is this need for cultural shift, and for those folks, those 20,000 students to go out into the world and experience some things and then be like, what the hell was I learning? You know what I mean? What was I being taught? Like, how did that happen where I'm now have a Native person in my class, at college, and they're looking at me like I'm a flaming racist because I'm saying horribly racist things, and all their friends and all my friends are looking at me like I'm like this jackass, right? And like, hopefully students like don't have to go through that, but it seems like for now they're going to keep going through that, right? And I feel like that those pieces are like over time, but it's something that with this particular, with it going viral and all of that, it actually was really encouraging to me to see so many people immediately recognize it for what it was, to immediately see, hey, this is racist as hell, and it's really obvious. What are these girls doing walking down Disney World? They couldn't wear their headdresses, but they're allowed to say scalp them. I mean, like, seriously. And they call themselves the Indianettes. Like, that's embarrassing. That's embarrassingly racist. I don't care what your intention is. You know what I mean? Your intention doesn't change the outcome. The outcome is that you're doing some really, really, really racist, disgusting things, that are harmful to real people. So, like, I think
because Disney called it out, right? Like,
well, kind of, like they kind of did. Like they were like, no headdresses, but scalp them.
Yeah, you're good. Like, it was kind of funny to me because we all know that Disney has its own history of anti-indigeneity. Like, I mean, there was a time when I created the hashtag Not Your Pocahontas, and we keep having these discussions because they keep trying to bring up ways to modernize their Disney racism. And so for them to just say, well, you can't wear the war bonnet, but for them to, let them say scalp them. But of course, I don't know if you saw the press release, but they said that, the cheer that they did where they said scalp them, that wasn't what was submitted to them. Like, that wasn't in their original proposal for their performance.
Even though they've done it like 8 years before, like every year for 8 years, like, yeah, but you did though, like you
knew. So it kind of felt like a PR move for them to even address it at all, even though it was very weak sauce. But one of the reasons I think that they felt the need to address it was because if you go to Disneyland, you're seeing white people dressed up as Pocahontas, and we also have rumors of live action versions of Pocahontas being made. And, of course, there's another Peter Pan coming out. So I think it was a preemptive PR move to try and be like, no, Native people, look, we're trying to be respectful in some regard, but it was weak sauce. But I think the fact that they did call it out really reflected something back on the PNG community to be like, oh no, Disney was cool with us all these years before. What's wrong now? What's happening now? So I do feel like this whole community feels like they actually are under attack by everybody right now. And which is scary, right? Because when people get scared, when they get frightened, when they feel threatened, that violence that they enact is always going to be justified. So if there's natives in that community, that are going to be dealing with the backlash, like I actually do worry for them because look what happened to you, like you had people coming at you and saying horrible things. Of course, death threats follow, but it's something that scares me a lot when people, especially these communities, feel threatened because they justify their means. And because it is a community and they have that community support, it means that threat of violence is even more real. And the chances of there actually being consequences for that violence is actually very slim. And especially in a place like Texas, where, you know, they are experiencing just these extreme amounts of bigotry right now being pushed into policy, you know, and it's not just, you know, racism, but, you know, it's transphobia as well that is on display here in Texas. It's a very dangerous time for people in Texas to be Indigenous, to be Black, to be trans. And I think that's something that is really worrisome right now, you know, because there's so many issues coming up to head, and, you know, there's a lot of vulnerable people. And, you know, my worry is just the violence that they're going to experience. And how do we help them? And how do we let them know that they are supported, you know, that they don't have to be afraid, that we got their backs, you know, and that we will help them in any way that we can to kind of, I guess you would say, reduce the risk in any way that we can, but also to make sure that in case of violence or in case of injustice, that we will help them fight that battle to get that justice.
So with that, the importance of community organizing cannot be understated, and connectivity and relationships. And I want to thank everyone for coming today, and thank the organizers for pulling this together. Really deeply appreciate it. And all the good love and light for the folks that are going out on Monday. Please be safe and be strong. And if I were to give one piece of advice, it's just maintain yourself. Don't engage, because they're going to make themselves look the way they look. They'll expose their own racism for sure. So, miigwech. Appreciate it, you guys.
Thank you.